Welcome to another captivating Sovereign Diplomat episode. In this video, we're diving deep into the US-Russia rivalry that has shaped our world for decades. We'll uncover the historical foundations of this conflict, tracing its origins and exploring how it has influenced global politics and sparked international conflicts. From the Cold War to current-day tensions, we'll examine the key events that have intensified this rivalry and explore the pressing issues that keep these two nations at odds today. We'll also look ahead, considering the future implications of this rivalry on global stability. Can these two powers ever find common ground? What impact does their relationship have on other countries and international alliances? And in an age of advanced technology, how do espionage, propaganda, and cyber warfare play into this high-stakes game? Stick around as we unravel the complexities of the US-Russia rivalry and its far-reaching consequences for our global future. To understand the complex dynamics of the US-Russia rivalry, we need to journey back in time to its origins. The seeds of this conflict were sown in the aftermath of World War II, as the world's geopolitical landscape underwent a seismic shift. The United States and the Soviet Union, once allies against Nazi Germany, emerged as the two dominant superpowers, each with vastly different visions for the future of global order. The rivalry's roots lie in a fundamental clash of ideologies. On one side stood the United States, champion of capitalism and liberal democracy. On the other, the Soviet Union, standard-bearer of communism and state control. These competing worldviews weren't just abstract concepts. They represented fundamentally different approaches to governance, economics, and individual freedoms. The stark contrast between these ideologies set the stage for a global conflict that would define much of the 20th century. Early confrontations between these two giants quickly escalated tensions. The division of Germany, and particularly the partition of Berlin, became a powerful symbol of the emerging Cold War. The Berlin blockade of 1948-1949, where the Soviet Union cut off West Berlin from vital supplies, marked one of the first major crises. The United States responded with the Berlin Airlift, a massive operation to supply the city by air, demonstrating both the intensity of the conflict and the lengths to which each side would go to assert its influence. Another pivotal moment came with the development of nuclear weapons. The US, having used atomic bombs to end World War II, held a brief monopoly on this terrifying new technology. But the Soviet Union's successful test of its own atomic bomb in 1949 ushered in an era of mutually assured destruction, adding a layer of existential dread to the rivalry. This nuclear standoff would come to define much of the Cold War era, with both nations locked in an arms race that threatened global annihilation. The 1950s saw the rivalry intensify and spread across the globe. Proxy wars, where the US and Soviet Union supported opposing sides in conflicts around the world, became a hallmark of this period. The Korean War, beginning in 1950, saw American troops directly facing Soviet-backed forces, setting a pattern that would repeat in various forms throughout the Cold War. Meanwhile, the rise of McCarthyism in the United States and continued political repression in the Soviet Union highlighted the domestic impacts of this international rivalry, as fear and suspicion of the other side permeated both societies. These early years of confrontation and tension laid the groundwork for decades of rivalry to come. Thus, they established patterns of behavior, lines of conflict, and spheres of influence that would shape global politics for generations. Understanding these historical foundations is crucial to grasping the full scope and significance of the US-Russia rivalry, both in its past manifestations and its present-day incarnations. The rivalry between the United States and Russia didn't just shape their bilateral relations, it fundamentally altered the entire landscape of global politics. In the aftermath of World War II, these two superpowers emerged as the primary architects of a new world order, each vying for dominance and influence. The post-war era saw the world effectively split into two camps. On one side, the United States championed capitalism, democracy, and free markets. On the other, the Soviet Union promoted communism, state control, and centralized economic planning. This ideological schism became the defining feature of international relations for decades to come. This division manifested most visibly in the formation of opposing military alliances. In 1949, the United States, Canada, and several Western European nations formed the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. This collective defense pact was designed to counter the perceived threat of Soviet expansion. In response, the Soviet Union and its Eastern European satellite states established the Warsaw Pact in 1950. These two alliances stood as the military embodiment of the ideological divide, with each side viewing the other as an existential threat. But the impact of this rivalry extended far beyond Europe and North America. As European colonial empires crumbled in the post-war years, newly independent nations in Africa, Asia, and Latin America found themselves caught in the crossfire of superpower competition. This period of decolonization coincided with the height of the Cold War, and both the US and the USSR saw these emerging nations as potential allies or battlegrounds in their global struggle. The concept of the Third World emerged during this time, referring to countries that aligned with neither the capitalist First World nor the communist Second World. Many of these nations, seeking to chart their own course, formed the non-aligned movement. However, true neutrality was often difficult to maintain, as both superpowers exerted economic, political, and sometimes military pressure to gain influence. This competition played out in various ways across the globe. Both sides provided economic aid, military support, and ideological guidance to sympathetic regimes or opposition movements. This led to a series of proxy wars where local conflicts became battlegrounds for superpower influence. From Vietnam to Angola, from Cuba to Afghanistan, the US and USSR fought indirectly, each supporting opposing sides in conflicts that would shape the destinies of entire regions. The rivalry also significantly influenced global economic systems. The US-led Bretton Woods system established international economic institutions like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, while the Soviet Union created its own economic bloc with the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. This economic dimension of the rivalry further entrenched the global divide and had lasting impacts on international trade and development. In essence, the US-Russia rivalry became the prism through which much of global politics was viewed for nearly half a century. It influenced everything from international alliances and military strategies to economic policies and cultural exchange. As the US-Russia rivalry intensified, it manifested in a series of dramatic events and confrontations that brought the world to the brink of conflict multiple times. These flashpoints not only defined the rivalry, but also shaped the course of global history. We've already touched on the Berlin blockade and airlift of 1948-1949, but its significance cannot be overstated. This was the first major crisis of the Cold War, where the Soviet Union blocked all land and water routes to West Berlin, attempting to force the Western allies out. The US and its allies responded with a massive airlift, flying in supplies to sustain the city for nearly a year. This standoff set the tone for future confrontations and demonstrated the lengths to which both sides would go to assert their influence. Perhaps the most terrifying moment of the Cold War came in October 1962 with the Cuban Missile Crisis. The discovery of Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from US shores, brought the world to the very edge of nuclear war. For 13 tense days, the world held its breath as US President Kennedy and Soviet leader Khrushchev engaged in a high-stakes diplomatic dance. The peaceful resolution of this crisis led to improved communication between some superpowers, including the establishment of the Moscow-Washington hotline. Not all aspects of the rivalry were destructive, however. The space race, sparked by the Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957, pushed both nations to remarkable achievements in space exploration. This competition culminated in the US moon landing in 1999, a moment that captured the world's imagination. While rooted in rivalry, the space race led to technological advancements that benefit us to this day. The rivalry also played out in proxy wars across the globe. The Vietnam War saw the US become deeply involved in a conflict to prevent the spread of communism in Southeast Asia, while the Soviet Union provided support to North Vietnam. Later, the tables turned in Afghanistan, where the Soviet Union became embroiled in a costly war, while the US supported the Afghan Mujahideen. These conflicts exacted a terrible human toll and had far-reaching consequences that continue to impact global politics. The most symbolic moment of the Cold War's end came with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. As Soviet control over Eastern Europe weakened, the wall that had divided Berlin for nearly 3 decades came tumbling down, reuniting the city and symbolizing the crumbling of the Iron Curtain. This momentous event was followed by the collapse of the Soviet Union itself in 1991, marking the end of the Cold War era. The dissolution of the USSR fundamentally altered the global balance of power. The bipolar world order that had existed for nearly half a century gave way to a new era of American dominance. However, this shift also sowed the seeds for future tensions as Russia grappled with its diminished status and sought to reassert its influence on the world stage. While the Cold War may have ended with the fall of the Soviet Union, the rivalry between the United States and Russia is far from over. In recent years, we've seen a resurgence of tensions, with new flashpoints emerging and old grievances resurfacing. Let's explore some of the key issues driving the current state of US-Russia relations. One of the most contentious issues has been the expansion of NATO. Since the end of the Cold War, NATO has grown to include many former Warsaw Pact countries and even some former Soviet republics. From the Western perspective, this expansion represents the spread of democracy and collective security. However, Russia views it as a direct threat to its sphere of influence and national security. The prospect of Ukraine joining NATO in particular has been a major point of contention, with Russia seeing it as a red line that cannot be crossed. This brings us to one of the most significant current conflicts, the situation in Ukraine. Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and its ongoing support for separatist movements in eastern Ukraine have led to a sharp deterioration in relations with the West. The conflict has resulted in thousands of deaths, displaced millions, and triggered waves of economic sanctions against Russia. It remains a major obstacle to any improvement in US-Russia relations. Another area of conflict is Syria, where the US and Russia have backed opposing sides in the civil war. While both countries claim to be fighting terrorism, their differing views on the Assad regime and their competing strategic interests in the region have led to dangerous military confrontations and diplomatic standoffs. In recent years, allegations of election interference have further strained the relationship. US intelligence agencies have accused Russia of meddling in the 2016 and 2020 US presidential elections, using tactics such as social media disinformation campaigns and cyber attacks. These allegations have led to additional sanctions and a climate of deep mistrust between the two nations. Speaking of sanctions, they have become a key tool in this modern rivalry. The US and its allies have imposed numerous rounds of economic sanctions on Russia in response to actions in Ukraine, alleged election interference, and other issues. Russia has responded with counter-sanctions, leading to a situation of economic tension that has impacted global trade and finance. Lastly, arms control, once a cornerstone of US-Russia cooperation, has become another area of disagreement. The collapse of key treaties like the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty and ongoing disputes over the New START Treaty have raised concerns about a new arms race. Both countries are developing new weapon systems, including hypersonic missiles and modernized nuclear arsenals, fueling fears of increased military tension. As we look to the future, the US-Russia rivalry continues to have profound implications for global stability. However, amidst the tensions, there are also potential areas for cooperation that could benefit both nations and the world at large. Climate change and terrorism are two global challenges that require international cooperation. Both the US and Russia have expressed concern about these issues, and collaboration in these areas could potentially help ease tensions in other aspects of their relationship. Joint efforts to combat climate change or counter international terrorism could provide a foundation for rebuilding trust and cooperation. However, the risks of escalation and conflict remain significant. Misunderstandings or miscalculations in areas of tension, such as Eastern Europe or the Middle East, could potentially lead to direct confrontation. The expansion of the rivalry into new domains like cyberspace and outer space also increases the potential for conflict. The ongoing tensions between these two powers have a substantial impact on the global economic system. Sanctions and counter-sanctions disrupt trade flows and investment patterns, while uncertainty about future relations can dampen economic growth. The potential for economic warfare, including the weaponization of the US dollar's role in global finance, poses risks to the stability of the international economic order. Perhaps most concerning is the challenge this rivalry poses to international institutions and norms. The UN Security Council, where both nations hold veto power, is often paralyzed by their disagreements. The erosion of arms control agreements weakens the global non-proliferation regime. More broadly, their competition undermines the idea of a rules-based international order, as both sides accuse the other of violating international law and norms. The complex and often contentious relationship between the United States and Russia has far-reaching implications that extend well beyond their bilateral ties. The reverberations of this rivalry can be felt across the globe, shaping the policies and security concerns of other nations and international alliances. Consider the impact on the European Union. As the primary American ally in Europe, many EU countries have found themselves caught in the middle of the US-Russia rivalry. The expansion of NATO, which Russia views as a threat, has become a source of tension within the EU, with some member states more cautious about antagonizing Russia than others. This divide has made it challenging for the EU to develop a unified policy towards Russia, hampering its ability to act as a cohesive geopolitical force. Furthermore, the US-Russia rivalry has implications for European security. Russia's annexation of Crimea and involvement in the conflict in eastern Ukraine have raised concerns about the stability of the European continent. NATO has bolstered its presence in Eastern Europe in response, leading to a heightened military presence along the borders with Russia. This has prompted fears of a new arms race and the potential for miscalculation or escalation. Beyond Europe, the US-Russia rivalry has also influenced the global position of China. As the two superpowers have engaged in their high-stakes competition, China has sought to capitalize on the situation, positioning itself as a counterweight to both the US and Russia. Beijing has strengthened economic and political ties with Moscow, even as it maintains a complex relationship with Washington. This has allowed China to expand its influence in various regions, from Central Asia to the Middle East and Africa. The impact on developing nations and emerging powers has been similarly complex. Many of these countries have found themselves courted by both the US and Russia, each seeking to expand its sphere of influence. This has led to a proliferation of proxy wars and military interventions as the two powers vie for dominance in strategically important regions. The resulting instability and violence have had devastating consequences for local populations. Understanding this complex rivalry is crucial for global citizens. It shapes the geopolitical landscape in which we all live, influencing the decisions and actions of world leaders, the dynamics of international organizations, and the day-to-day lives of people around the world. By comprehending the roots, evolution, and current manifestations of this rivalry, we can better navigate the uncertain waters of the 21st century. In this video, we're diving deep into one of the most pressing geopolitical issues of our time. From the halls of power in Washington, D.C., to the secretive regime in Pyongyang, we'll unravel the complex web of history, politics, and nuclear ambitions that have brought us to this critical juncture. We'll start by exploring the current state of the US-North Korea nuclear arms race and trace its origins through history. You'll meet the key players shaping this conflict and discover the pivotal moments that have defined their relationship. We'll assess the true threat level of a potential nuclear conflict and its far-reaching consequences. You'll gain insights into the diplomatic efforts to defuse the crisis and the international community's perspective. We'll examine the impact of this standoff on the Korean Peninsula, the surrounding region, and the global stage. Looking ahead, we'll discuss potential future scenarios and their implications for world peace. But that's not all. We'll also delve into the often overlooked aspects of this crisis. How do ordinary citizens in both countries view this nuclear standoff? What are the economic and humanitarian costs of this ongoing tension? These questions and more will be addressed as we paint a comprehensive picture of the situation. So, are you ready to unpack the complexities of the US-North Korea nuclear standoff? Let's begin by examining the current state of the US-North Korea nuclear arms race. As of 2020, the situation remains tense and complex, with both nations maintaining significant nuclear capabilities. North Korea, despite being a small and isolated nation, has made substantial progress in its nuclear program. Estimates suggest that Pyongyang possesses between 20 to 60 nuclear warheads, though the exact number remains uncertain. What's more concerning is their advancing missile technology. In recent years, North Korea has demonstrated the ability to launch intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, potentially capable of reaching the United States. They've also shown progress in developing submarine-launched ballistic missiles, adding a new dimension to their nuclear threat. On the other side, the United States maintains a vast nuclear arsenal of approximately 5,750 nuclear warheads, with about 3,800 of these considered operational. The U.S. nuclear triad, consisting of land-based ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and strategic bombers, provides a robust deterrent capability. Additionally, the U.S. has been investing in modernizing its nuclear forces and developing advanced missile defense systems. Recent developments have only heightened tensions. North Korea has continued to conduct missile tests, including launches of what they claim to be hypersonic missiles and new types of cruise missiles. These tests, often conducted in defiance of UN resolutions, have been met with international condemnation. The U.S., in response, has maintained its policy of maximum pressure, combining economic sanctions with diplomatic isolation. Despite occasional glimmers of hope, such as the historic summits between U.S. and North Korean leaders in 2018 and 2019, substantive progress towards denuclearization has remained elusive. And talks have stalled, with both sides accusing the other of not meeting commitments. The U.S. insists on complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization, while North Korea demands sanctions relief and security guarantees. This ongoing stalemate has led to a continuing cycle of provocations and countermeasures. North Korea periodically threatens to resume nuclear testing or long-range missile launches, while the US and its allies conduct joint military exercises in the region, which Pyongyang views as rehearsals for invasion. To understand the current nuclear standoff, we need to delve into its historical roots, starting with the Korean War. The conflict, which raged from 1950 to 1953, left an indelible mark on the Korean peninsula and set the stage for decades of tension. The Korean War began when North Korea, supported by the Soviet Union and China, invaded South Korea. The United States, leading a UN coalition, intervened on behalf of South Korea. The war ended in a stalemate with an armistice signed in 1953. However, this was not a peace treaty, and technically, the two Koreas remain at war to this day. The conflict resulted in a divided peninsula with a heavily fortified demilitarized zone, DMZ, separating North and South. In the aftermath of the war, North Korea, under the leadership of Kim Il-sung, embarked on a path of self-reliance known as Juche. This ideology, combined with the perceived threat from the US and its allies, laid the groundwork for North Korea's pursuit of nuclear weapons. North Korea's nuclear program can be traced back to the 1950s, when it began cooperating with the Soviet Union on nuclear research. By the 1980s, there were clear indications that Pyongyang was pursuing nuclear weapons capability. The country's first nuclear reactor, located in Yongbyon, became operational in 1986. Tensions escalated in the early 1990s when North Korea refused to allow international inspectors full access to its nuclear sites. This led to the first North Korean nuclear crisis in 1994. The crisis was temporarily resolved with the agreed framework, where North Korea agreed to freeze its nuclear program in exchange for aid and civilian nuclear reactors. However, the agreement broke down in the early 2000s amid mutual accusations of non-compliance. In 2003, North Korea withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, marking a significant milestone in its nuclear ambitions. The country conducted its first nuclear test in 2006, sending shockwaves through the international community. Since then, key milestones in US-North Korea relations have been characterized by cycles of provocation and diplomacy. The six-party talks involving North and South Korea, the US, China, Japan, and Russia attempted to find a peaceful resolution, but ultimately failed. North Korea conducted additional nuclear tests in 2009, 2013, 2016, and 2017, each more powerful than the last. A surprising turn of events occurred in 2018, when North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and US President Donald Trump held a historic summit in Singapore. This was followed by two more meetings in 2019. While these summits were groundbreaking in terms of high-level engagement, they failed to produce concrete results towards denuclearization. Throughout this history, the US policy towards North Korea has oscillated between engagement and pressure, while North Korea has consistently used its nuclear program as a bargaining chip for aid and security guarantees. This complex historical backdrop continues to shape the dynamics of the current nuclear standoff as both nations grapple with deep-seated mistrust and conflicting strategic interests. The US-North Korea nuclear standoff has been significantly influenced by the personalities and policies of key leaders on both sides. Let's examine the major players who have shaped this conflict over the years. On the US side, several administrations have grappled with the North Korean nuclear issue. President Bill Clinton's administration negotiated the agreed framework in 1994, attempting to freeze North Korea's nuclear program. George W. Bush took a harder line, famously including North Korea in his axis of evil. The Obama administration adopted a policy of strategic patience, combining sanctions with openness to dialogue. Donald Trump broke new ground with his personal diplomacy, holding unprecedented summits with Kim Jong-un, though these ultimately failed to produce lasting results. The current Biden administration has sought a middle ground, emphasizing diplomacy while maintaining pressure through sanctions. Key figures in the current administration, such as Secretary of State Antony Blinken and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan have been instrumental in shaping this approach. On the North Korean side, the conflict has been dominated by the Kim dynasty. Kim Il-sung, the country's founder, initiated the nuclear program. His son, Kim Jong-il, oversaw North Korea's first nuclear tests and developed the Songun, or military-first policy. The current leader, Kim Jong-un, has accelerated the nuclear program, conducting more tests and advancing missile technology at a rapid pace. Kim Jong-un's leadership style differs from his predecessors. He's shown a willingness to engage in high-level diplomacy, but has also demonstrated an unpredictable and often aggressive approach to international relations. His sister, Kim Yo-jong, has emerged as a powerful figure, often delivering pointed messages to the international community. Other influential figures have played crucial roles in this conflict. On the North Korean side, individuals like Choi Son-hui, the first Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Kim Yong-chol, a top party official and former intelligence chief, have been key in diplomatic negotiations. Military leaders such as Pak Jong-chon, Chief of the General Staff, have been instrumental in advancing North Korea's nuclear and missile capabilities. In the broader international context, Chinese President Xi Jinping has been a significant player given China's unique relationship with North Korea. South Korean leaders, including current President Yoon Suk-yeol and his predecessor Moon Jae-in, have also played crucial roles in attempting to mediate the conflict. International diplomats and organizations have also been influential. The efforts of individuals like Christopher Hill, who led the U.S. delegation to the six-party talks, and Siegfried Hecker, a nuclear scientist who has visited North Korea's nuclear facilities, have provided valuable insights and diplomatic channels. The history of U.S.-North Korea relations is marked by several pivotal moments that have shaped the course of their nuclear standoff. The first nuclear crisis in 1994 stands out as a defining moment. Tensions escalated when North Korea announced its intention to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The situation reached a boiling point, with the Clinton administration even considering military action. However, diplomacy prevailed. Former President Jimmy Carter's intervention paved the way for negotiations, resulting in the agreed framework. This agreement saw North Korea commit to freezing its nuclear program in exchange for aid and 2 light water reactors. While the crisis was averted, the agreement's eventual collapse highlighted the challenges of sustainable diplomatic solutions. The six-party talks, which ran from 2003 to 2009, represented another significant diplomatic effort. These negotiations involved North and South Korea, the United States, China, Japan, and Russia. The talks aimed to find a peaceful resolution to the security concerns raised by North Korea's nuclear program. Despite some initial progress, including a 2005 joint statement where North Korea agreed to abandon its nuclear program, the talks ultimately broke down. North Korea's missile tests and nuclear test in 2006 dealt a severe blow to the process, showcasing the fragility of diplomatic achievements in this complex relationship. Periods of increased tensions and provocations have punctuated U.S.-North Korea relations. The years 2010 to 2017 saw a series of provocative actions by North Korea, including the sinking of a South Korean naval vessel, artillery attacks on South Korean territory, and a string of nuclear and missile tests. These actions led to increased sanctions and international isolation for North Korea. The rhetoric also escalated, with North Korea threatening to turn Seoul into a sea of fire, and the U.S. warning of fire and fury if North Korea threatened American territories. A surprising turn came with the summit meetings and negotiations of 2018 to 2019. The Singapore summit in June 2018 marked the first ever meeting between sitting leaders of the U.S. and North Korea. President Donald Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un signed a joint statement pledging to work towards complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. This was followed by the Hanoi summit in February 2019 and a brief meeting at the Korean Demilitarized Zone in June 2019. While these summits were historic in their own right, they failed to produce concrete steps towards denuclearization. The The breakdown of the Hanoi talks, in particular, highlighted the deep divisions that remain between the two nations on the path to denuclearization. In the aftermath of these summits, relations have once again cooled. North Korea has resumed missile testing, while the US has maintained its sanctions regime. The COVID-19 pandemic further complicated diplomatic efforts, with North Korea closing its borders and limiting international engagement. Let's now turn our attention to assessing the current nuclear threat level, examining both North Korea's capabilities and the United States' deterrence and defense systems. North Korea's nuclear and missile capabilities have advanced significantly in recent years, raising serious concerns in the international community. While the exact extent of their nuclear arsenal remains uncertain, experts estimate that North Korea possesses between 20 to 60 nuclear warheads. However, it's not just the number of warheads that's concerning, but also the rapid advancement in delivery systems. Pyongyang has made substantial progress in its missile technology. They've successfully tested intercontinental ballistic missiles, ICBMs, that theoretically could reach the United States. The Hwasong-15 ICBM, tested in 2017, demonstrated a potential range of over 13,000 kilometers, putting most of the globe within reach. More recently, North Korea has claimed successful tests of hypersonic missiles, which, if true, would present a new level of threat due to their speed and maneuverability. Moreover, North Korea has been working on diversifying its nuclear delivery systems. They've made strides in developing submarine-launched ballistic missiles, SLBMs, which could significantly enhance their second strike capability. There's also evidence suggesting they're working on multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle MIR-V technology, which would allow a single missile to carry multiple warheads. However, it's crucial to note that while North Korea has made these advancements, questions remain about the reliability and accuracy of their systems, the operational readiness of their nuclear forces, and the miniaturization of warheads to fit on missiles are areas of ongoing debate among experts. On the other side, the United States possesses a formidable nuclear deterrent and a multi-layered missile defense system. The U.S. nuclear triad, consisting of land-based ICBMs, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and strategic bombers, provides a robust and diverse nuclear force. This ensures a credible deterrent by guaranteeing a second strike capability even in the face of a surprise attack. In terms of missile defense, the U.S. has invested heavily in systems designed to counter the North Korean threat. The ground-based mid-course defense GMD system, with interceptors based in Alaska and California, is specifically designed to defend against ICBMs. Additionally, the U.S. has deployed terminal high-altitude area defense THAAD systems in South Korea and Guam, and Aegis ballistic missile defense systems on naval vessels in the Pacific. These defense systems, while technologically advanced, are not foolproof. Intercepting ICBMs, especially those with decoys or MIRV capabilities, remains a significant challenge. The effectiveness of these systems against newer threats like hypersonic missiles is also a matter of ongoing development and debate. The overall nuclear threat level, therefore, is a complex equation. While North Korea's nuclear capabilities pose a serious concern, the U.S. maintains a significant military and technological edge. The real danger lies not just in the raw capabilities, but in the potential for miscalculation or escalation in a crisis situation. The possibility of a limited nuclear exchange, even if not intended, cannot be entirely ruled out, making continued diplomatic efforts and arms control measures crucial for regional and global security. While the possibility of a nuclear conflict between the United States and North Korea remains low, the potential consequences are so catastrophic that they demand our serious consideration. The immediate impact on the Korean Peninsula would be nothing short of apocalyptic. Even a limited nuclear exchange would result in unprecedented devastation. Major cities like Seoul and Pyongyang, with their dense populations, would face unimaginable destruction. The death toll from immediate blasts, radiation, and subsequent fallout could reach into the millions. Critical infrastructure, including power plants, transportation networks, and communication systems, would be obliterated, plunging the peninsula into chaos. The path to resolving the US-North Korea nuclear crisis has been long and fraught with challenges, marked by a series of negotiations, agreements, and setbacks. The 1994 agreed framework stands out as an early diplomatic success, where North Korea agreed to freeze its plutonium weapons program in exchange for aid. However, its collapse in 2002, amid mutual accusations of non-compliance, highlighted the fragility of such deals. The subsequent six-party talks, initiated in 2003, brought together key regional players in an attempt to find a comprehensive solution. These talks produced several joint statements and agreements, including a 2005 statement where North Korea agreed to abandon its nuclear weapons program. Yet progress was short-lived, with North Korea's first nuclear test in 2006 demonstrating the challenges of maintaining diplomatic momentum. More recent initiatives have shown a mix of promise and disappointment. The 2018 Singapore summit between President Trump and Kim Jong-un was a historic moment, resulting in a joint statement committing to complete denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. This was followed by the Hanoi summit, 2019, which, despite high hopes, ended without an agreement. These summits, while groundbreaking in terms of high-level engagement, ultimately failed to produce concrete steps towards denuclearization. Current diplomatic efforts are in a state of relative stagnation. The Biden administration has expressed openness to diplomacy, offering to meet with North Korean officials without preconditions. However, North Korea has shown little interest in engaging, instead focusing on advancing its weapons programs. The US and North Korea have fundamentally different understandings of what denuclearization means and how it should be achieved, with the US typically insisting on complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization, while North Korea seeks a more gradual approach with concurrent benefits. The interests of other regional powers, particularly China and South Korea, can both facilitate and complicate bilateral negotiations. Despite these challenges, diplomacy remains the most viable path to resolving the crisis. Future efforts will likely need to focus on building trust through smaller, verifiable agreements before tackling the larger issue of complete denuclearization. Creative approaches, patience, and sustained engagement from all parties involved will be crucial in navigating the complex landscape of US-North Korea relations and working towards a peaceful resolution to this long-standing nuclear standoff. The path to peace is often long and challenging, but it's a journey we must undertake for the sake of global security and the future of our planet. The geopolitical landscape is undergoing a seismic shift. China's meteoric rise and the perceived decline of American hegemony have become the defining narrative of our times. But what's driving this monumental power shift? In this video, we'll delve into the key factors shaping this new era. Are we witnessing an inevitable passing of the torch, or can the US reclaim its dominant position? We'll explore the battlegrounds where China is making significant strides. These include technology, military might, and economic influence. How is the US strategizing to counter China's growing power? We'll examine the global repercussions of this rivalry, from its impact on the world economy to the precarious position of smaller nations caught in the crossfire. Are we seeing history repeat itself? We'll draw parallels from past superpower rivalries and gauge public sentiment on both sides of the Pacific. Ultimately, we'll peer into the future. Will this rivalry ignite conflict, or can it foster cooperation? Let's dive in and unravel the complexities of the US-China relationship. Let's start by examining the numbers that tell the story of China's ascent and America's relative decline. In 2000, China's GDP was just 12% of the US's. Fast forward to 2023, and that figure has skyrocketed to around 70%. This staggering economic growth has been mirrored in other areas. China has overtaken the US as the world's largest trading nation and is now the top trading partner for more countries than the US. In terms of technological advancement, China has made remarkable strides. In 2019, China surpassed the US in the number of international patent applications filed, marking a symbolic shift in global innovation leadership. The country has also become a world leader in 5G technology, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing. Now let's look at a timeline of significant events that have shaped this power dynamic. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, catapulting its integration into the global economy. In 2008, the global financial crisis weakened the US economy while China's continued to grow. In 2013, China launched the Belt and Road Initiative, expanding its global economic influence. In 2018, the US-China trade war began, highlighting the growing tensions between the two powers. In 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic hit, with China recovering more quickly economically than the US. In 2023, China brokered a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, showcasing its growing diplomatic clout. These events underscore a gradual but significant shift in the global balance of power. While the US remains a superpower with unparalleled military might and cultural influence, China's rapid advancement in economic and technological spheres has reshaped the international landscape. It's important to note that America's decline is relative rather than absolute. The US continues to lead in many areas, including higher education, scientific research, and military technology. However, the narrowing gap between the two nations has led to increased competition and tension, setting the stage for the complex dynamics we see today. At the heart of China's ascent is its economic transformation. China's state-directed capitalism, coupled with its massive population, has created an economic powerhouse. The country's focus on export-led growth, strategic investments in infrastructure, and gradual market reforms have fueled unprecedented economic expansion. Meanwhile, the US has grappled with challenges such as growing income inequality, outsourcing of manufacturing jobs, and the aftermath of the 2008 financial crisis. The COVID-19 pandemic further exposed vulnerabilities in the US economy, while China's swift recovery showcased its economic resilience. China's Belt and Road Initiative, a vast infrastructure project spanning multiple continents, has extended its economic influence globally. This has not only boosted China's trade relationships, but also increased its geopolitical clout in participating countries. China's technological leap has been nothing short of remarkable. The country's heavy investment in research and development, particularly in areas like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and 5G technology, has positioned it as a tech leader in many sectors. The Chinese government's Made in China 2025 Inches initiative aims to dominate emerging high-tech industries. This state-backed push, combined with a vast domestic market for tech adoption, has accelerated China's technological progress. In contrast, while the US still leads in many areas of innovation, there are concerns about declining federal funding for research and development and the challenges of maintaining technological superiority across all fronts. Politically, China's model of authoritarian capitalism has challenged the long-held Western assumption that economic development inevitably leads to democratization. China's ability to mobilize resources and implement long-term strategies without the constraints of electoral cycles has been seen as an advantage in certain aspects of development and crisis management. Socially, China has lifted hundreds of millions out of poverty, creating a burgeoning middle class and fostering national pride. This has lent legitimacy to the ruling Communist Party and its vision of China's place in the world. In the US, political polarization and social unrest have raised questions about the stability and effectiveness of its democratic system. The country has struggled with issues like racial inequality, healthcare access, and education reform, which have impacted its soft power globally. Internationally, China's growing confidence has translated into a more assertive foreign policy, as seen in its approach to territorial disputes in the South China Sea and its stance on Taiwan. The US, meanwhile, has grappled with a shifting global role, particularly following the Trump administration's America First policy and subsequent efforts to rebuild international alliances. Some experts argue that China's rise to global preeminence is inevitable due to several factors. First, China's sheer population size, roughly 4 times that of the US, provides an enormous human capital advantage. This vast workforce, coupled with increasing educational standards, fuels economic growth and innovation. Secondly, China's long-term planning and state-directed capitalism allow for sustained, focused investments in strategic sectors. This approach has proven effective in areas like infrastructure development and emerging technologies. Lastly, the argument for inevitability points to historical patterns of rising and falling powers. Proponents of this view see China's ascent as a return to its historical position as a global power rather than an anomaly. However, the story is far from over. The US has several pathways to maintain its global leadership position. First is innovation renaissance, where the US could double down on its strengths in innovation and entrepreneurship by increasing investment in research and development, particularly in emerging fields like artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and biotechnology. The US could maintain its technological edge. Second is economic rejuvenation, where the US could implement policies to address income inequality, invest in infrastructure, and boost productivity. Reshoring critical industries and diversifying supply chains could also strengthen economic resilience. Third is diplomatic resurgence, whereby rebuilding and strengthening alliances, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, the US could create a counterbalance to China's growing influence. The recent formation of groups like AUKUS and the Quad suggests movement in this direction. Fourth is educational and workforce development, where investing in education, particularly in STEM fields, and reskilling programs could help the US maintain its competitive edge in the knowledge economy. Fifth is green technology leadership, where by taking the lead in the transition to sustainable energy and green technologies, the US could position itself at the forefront of the next major global economic shift. It's crucial to note that China faces its own challenges, including an aging population, environmental degradation, and potential political instability. These factors could slow China's rise or even reverse it. Moreover, the global order is not necessarily a zero-sum game. There's a possibility of a more multipolar world where both China and the US, along with other powers like the EU and India, share global leadership. As we delve deeper into the US-China rivalry, let's examine the key battlegrounds where this competition is most intensely playing out. The tech arena has become the primary battlefield in the US-China competition. While the US has traditionally led in innovation, China is rapidly closing the gap and even surpassing in some areas. In artificial intelligence, China has made significant strides. It now publishes more AI research papers than the US and is implementing AI in areas like facial recognition and smart cities at an unprecedented scale. However, the US still leads in fundamental AI research and top-tier AI talent. In 5G technology, Chinese companies like Huawei have taken a leading role, causing concern in the US about potential security implications. This has led to restrictions on Chinese tech companies in the US and pressure on allies to do the same. Quantum computing is another crucial area of competition. Both countries are investing heavily, with China claiming quantum supremacy in 2020, though the US disputes this claim. While the US still maintains the world's most powerful military, China's rapid modernization of its armed forces has shifted the balance in the Indo-Pacific region. The U.S. defense budget remains the world's largest at around $700 billion annually. China, while second, spends significantly less at approximately $250 billion. However, China's focused spending on area denial capabilities and asymmetric warfare has increased its ability to challenge U.S. military dominance in its near abroad. China has made notable advancements in hypersonic missiles, aircraft carriers, and cyber warfare capabilities. The U.S., meanwhile, is investing in next-generation technologies like AI-driven autonomous systems and space-based assets. The economic arena is perhaps where the shift in power is most visible. China's Belt and Road Initiative has significantly expanded its economic influence across Asia, Africa, and even parts of Europe. This has allowed China to secure resources, open new markets, and gain political leverage in participating countries. The U.S. has responded with initiatives like the Blue Dot Network and the Build Back Better World (B3W) partnership, aiming to provide alternatives to China's infrastructure investments. In trade policy, the landscape has shifted dramatically. The U.S.-China trade war, initiated in 2018, marked a turning point in economic relations. The U.S. has implemented tariffs and export controls, particularly in high-tech sectors, while China has retaliated with its own measures. China's dual circulation strategy, which aims to reduce dependence on exports while boosting domestic consumption, could reshape global trade patterns. Meanwhile, the U.S. is focusing on reshoring critical industries and strengthening economic ties with allies to counter China's influence. The competition in these arenas is not just about economic or military superiority. It's about setting global standards, shaping the rules of international engagement, and defining the future of the global order. The U.S. has adopted a multifaceted approach to address China's rising influence. One of the most significant policies has been the Pivot to Asia or Rebalance strategy, initiated under the Obama administration and continued, albeit in different forms, by subsequent administrations. This involves strengthening military alliances and economic partnerships in the Indo-Pacific region to counterbalance China's growing influence. Economically, the U.S. has taken a more confrontational stance in recent years. The ongoing trade dispute, initiated in 2018, has seen the imposition of tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. The U.S. has also implemented export controls and investment restrictions, particularly in high-tech sectors, to limit China's access to critical technologies. In the technology sphere, the U.S. has taken steps to secure its supply chains and protect its technological edge. The CHIPS and Science Act of 2022 aims to boost domestic semiconductor production and reduce reliance on Asian manufacturers. The U.S. has also been pressuring allies to exclude Chinese companies, particularly Huawei, from their 5G networks, citing national security concerns. Diplomatically, the U.S. has been working to strengthen alliances and form new partnerships. The Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, Quad, with Japan, Australia, and India, and the AUKUS partnership with the UK and Australia are prime examples of this strategy to create a network of allies to counterbalance China in the Indo-Pacific region. Looking ahead, several strategies have been proposed to enhance America's competitive position. The first strategy is increased investment in R&D. There are calls for significantly boosting federal funding for research and development, particularly in emerging technologies like AI, quantum computing, and biotechnology. This aims to maintain the U.S.'s technological edge. The second strategy is reshoring and friendshoring. Proposals to bring critical manufacturing back to the U.S. or to allied countries aim to reduce dependence on China and secure supply chains. The third strategy is enhanced economic partnerships. Initiatives like the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, IPEF, seek to deepen economic engagement with allies and partners in the region, offering an alternative to China's economic influence. The fourth strategy is talent attraction and retention. Recognizing the importance of human capital, there are discussions about reforming immigration policies to attract and retain global talent, particularly in STEM fields. The fifth strategy is targeted decoupling. While complete economic decoupling from China is generally seen as unfeasible and undesirable, there are proposals for selective decoupling in critical sectors to protect national security interests. The sixth strategy is renewed focus on soft power. Recognizing that the competition with China extends beyond hard power, there are calls to reinvest in America's soft power, its cultural influence, values, and educational institutions. The seventh strategy is climate leadership. By taking a leading role in addressing climate change, the U.S. could reassert global leadership and potentially find areas of cooperation with China. It's important to note that these strategies are not without controversy or challenges. Critics argue that some approaches risk escalating tensions and could lead to a new Cold War. Others point out that excessive focus on competition with China could distract from domestic issues and global challenges that require cooperation. The US-China rivalry is reshaping the global economic landscape. As the world's two largest economies engage in competition, their actions send ripples throughout the global market. The trade tensions between the two nations have led to increased volatility in financial markets and uncertainty in business planning. One significant impact has been the disruption of global supply chains. Many companies are now reassessing their reliance on Chinese manufacturing, leading to a trend of diversification or China plus one strategies. This shift is creating new opportunities for countries like Vietnam, India, and Mexico, but it's also increasing production costs for many goods. The competition in emerging technologies is driving increased investment in R&D globally. While this could lead to accelerated innovation, it also raises concerns about a potential splinternet, a fragmented global internet with competing technological standards and systems. The US-China trade war has had profound effects on international trade patterns. Tariffs and counter-tariffs have disrupted established trade flows, forcing many countries to recalibrate their trade relationships. We're seeing a trend towards regionalization of trade, with countries seeking to strengthen economic ties with neighbors and allies. Initiatives like the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, in Asia and the US-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, in North America reflect this shift. There's also a growing emphasis on strategic or resilient trade policies. Countries are increasingly willing to prioritize security concerns over pure economic efficiency, particularly in sectors deemed critical to national interests. The US-China rivalry is forcing countries around the world to navigate a complex diplomatic landscape. Many nations, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, find themselves in the uncomfortable position of trying to balance economic ties with China against security relationships with the US. We're seeing the emergence of new strategic groupings like the Quad and AUKUS, which aim to counter China's influence in the Indo-Pacific. At the same time, China's Belt and Road Initiative has expanded its network of economic partners across Asia, Africa, and parts of Europe. The competition is also affecting multilateral institutions. There's growing tension in organizations like the World Trade Organization and the United Nations, with both the US and China seeking to shape global norms and standards. Interestingly, this rivalry is also creating opportunities for other powers. The EU, for instance, is positioning itself as a regulatory superpower and a potential mediator between the US and China. India, as a large, rapidly growing economy, is gaining strategic importance as both the US and China court its favor. In the global south, many countries are leveraging the US-China competition to their advantage, playing the two powers against each other to secure better deals and maintain autonomy. As we delve deeper into the complexities of the US-China rivalry, it's illuminating to look back at history and draw parallels with past superpower competitions. By examining these historical precedents, we can gain valuable insights into the potential trajectories and consequences of the current geopolitical landscape. The most obvious historical parallel to the current US-China dynamic is the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. Like today's rivalry, it was characterized by ideological differences, economic competition, and a race for technological supremacy. Both rivalries feature two superpowers with divergent political systems competing for global influence. During the Cold War, it was capitalism versus communism. Today, it's liberal democracy versus authoritarian capitalism. In both cases, the rivalry extends beyond military might to encompass economic, technological, and cultural spheres of influence. Another historical parallel can be drawn with the rise of Germany in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, challenging British hegemony. This period was marked by economic competition and naval arms races, not unlike the current technological and military competition between the US and China. By studying these historical parallels, we can better understand the dynamics at play in the current US-China rivalry. However, it's crucial to remember that while history can guide us, the current situation is unique, shaped by unprecedented levels of global interconnectedness and shared global challenges. Looking to the future of US-China relations, it's clear that we're entering uncharted territory. The intertwined nature of our global economy, coupled with pressing global challenges like climate change, necessitates a degree of cooperation even amidst competition. The US-China relationship will undoubtedly be the defining geopolitical story of our time, with far-reaching implications for every nation and individual around the globe. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more geopolitical stories. With that said, thanks for watching.